The whole building was silent, only the soft hum of machines and the distant ticking of a clock could be heard. It was almost midnight. Everyone had gone home long ago except one man. His name was Daniel. He worked as a janitor in the company. Every night after the lights went off, Daniel quietly began his work, sweeping the halls and cleaning desks no one would notice in the morning. But that night was different. Someone was watching him. Up on the top floor behind the big glass windows of his office, the CEO, Mr. Callahan, sat alone. He had stayed late to finish some reports, but his mind was tired. He leaned back in his chair and looked out over the empty floors below. Something caught his eye, a small figure moving on the security monitor. It was Daniel. The CEO didn't know much about him. To him, Daniel was just another staffer, a quiet face that blended into the background. But the camera showed something strange. Daniel wasn't just cleaning. He was doing things no one asked him to do. Mr. Callahan watched as Daniel stopped by one of the work desks. The janitor picked up a broken photo frame, wiped it carefully, and fixed the stand with tape. Then he placed it neatly back where it belonged and smiled softly, as if he knew the person in the picture. The CEO frowned. Why would someone care so much about things that weren't theirs? Daniel moved on to another desk. He picked up a report folder, rearranged the pages, and wrote a small sticky note. Don't give up. Tomorrow is a new day. He placed it gently on the corner. Mr. Callahan leaned closer to the monitor. His curiosity grew stronger. This man wasn't acting like a cleaner. He was acting like someone who cared deeply about this place. The clock struck 12. Rain started falling outside, tapping gently against the windows. The world outside seemed asleep, but inside Daniel kept moving floor to floor. He noticed a flickering light in the corridor and took out a small screwdriver from his pocket. He fixed the loose wire carefully, even though it wasn't part of his duty. The light stopped flickering. He smiled again, satisfied. Upstairs, the CEO crossed his arms and whispered to himself, "What is he doing?" He had seen employees steal office supplies, leave early, and lie on reports, but this? A man staying late to fix lights, clean desks, and write kind notes? It made no sense. At one point, Daniel entered the CEO's office. Mr. Callahan froze. He watched through the camera feed as Daniel looked around the big room. The CEO expected him to steal something or sit on the chair like most people would. But Daniel didn't. He went straight to the side table where an old photo frame was lying face down. It showed the CEO with his family. The glass had a crack. Daniel took it, wiped the dust off, and quietly fixed it using clear tape. Then he placed it upright again, exactly where it belonged. He didn't touch anything else. He just looked at the photo for a moment as if feeling the loneliness inside it. Then he whispered something softly, though the camera had no sound. The CEO felt a strange tightness in his chest. He hadn't looked at that photo in months. His wife had left him and his son barely spoke to him anymore. But this janitor, this quiet man, had seen the broken frame and decided to fix it. Not for praise, not for reward, just because it was broken. Daniel turned off the lights and left the office the way he found it. He continued his cleaning rounds until 2 a.m., then left the building, locking the door behind him. The CEO stayed sitting there, staring at the monitor even after Daniel was gone. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. For the first time in years, he felt small. He was the head of the company, yet he had never noticed the people who kept it alive after hours. He realized that while he went home to his expensive apartment every night, men like Daniel stayed behind, making sure everything looked perfect for the next morning. As the rain grew heavier, Mr. Callahan turned off the monitor, but Daniel's image stayed in his mind. The janitor's calm, patient movements, the way he cared for things that weren't his, the quiet pride in his work, it all echoed in his thoughts. When he finally left his office, the floor smelled faintly of cleaning spray. Everything was shining, neat, and peaceful. On his own desk, he found a small sticky note, one he hadn't noticed before. It said, "Even the biggest buildings stand tall because of those who clean their floors." Mr. Callahan stood still for a long time, reading those words again and again. Then, for the first time in years, he smiled, not as a CEO, but as a man reminded of something he had long forgotten. Respect. That night changed something inside him. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet staffer, the one no one saw during the day, was about to teach him the biggest lesson of his life. And it all began in that empty office, under the soft hum of machines and the watchful eyes of a man who thought he had seen everything, until now. The next night came quietly, with the same soft hum of the city outside and the glow of lights fading one by one across the tall glass building. But this time it wasn't only Daniel who returned after hours. Mr. Callahan stayed again. He told his driver to go home early and said he'd finish important paperwork. The truth was, he just wanted to see that janitor again, to understand him. Something inside the CEO refused to rest after what he had seen. Down below, Daniel arrived carrying his old leather bag and a small lunchbox. His shoes were worn, his uniform faded, but his steps were calm and steady. The security guards nodded at him politely. He smiled back and walked toward the elevator, humming a soft tune under his breath. When the elevator doors closed, Mr. Callahan switched on the camera feed again. There he was, the same quiet man, starting his routine from the top floor this time. He didn't rush. He worked as if every object in the office was precious. He straightened chairs, cleaned screens, wiped off smudges from glass doors, and arranged pens neatly into rows. The CEO found himself staring, not with judgment, but with respect he couldn't explain. Hours passed, yet Daniel never slowed down. At one desk, he noticed a burnt-out bulb and changed it with one from his own bag. At another, he found a coffee mug left on a report and carefully cleaned both, then placed a small piece of candy beside the mug. No one had told him to do that. It wasn't part of his job, but he did it anyway. When Daniel reached the break room, he opened the fridge and took out spoiled milk someone had forgotten. He threw it away, wiped the shelves, and placed a handwritten note on the door. Please respect shared spaces. We all use them. He signed it with a smiley face. Mr. Callahan chuckled softly. Somehow this man's handwriting looked more honest than all the corporate reports he'd read that week. Later, Daniel went down to the main hall, where the company displayed its awards, dozens of shiny plaques celebrating leadership and innovation. He dusted them slowly, one by one. Then for a moment he stopped in front of a photograph showing the CEO shaking hands with world leaders. Daniel stared at it quietly. Maybe he was wondering what it felt like to be in that position, or maybe he just admired the clean lines of the frame. Either way, there was no jealousy in his eyes, only quiet understanding. At that exact moment, Mr. Callahan turned off the camera feed and decided to see for himself. He got up, took the elevator, and stepped onto the main floor. Daniel didn't notice him at first. He was on his knees fixing the loose edge of a carpet. Working late again? The CEO's voice echoed softly. Daniel looked up, startled. Oh, I didn't know anyone was still here, sir. I was just finishing up. The CEO smiled faintly. I can see that. Tell me something, Daniel. Why do you always stay so late? Daniel hesitated. His hands froze on the carpet edge. I like leaving things better than I found them, he said slowly. If I don't fix them, no one will. People deserve a clean start every morning. There was no pride in his tone, no false modesty, just truth. The CEO felt something twist in his chest again. And you pay for the supplies yourself? He asked quietly. Daniel looked embarrassed. Only sometimes. It's fine, sir. I don't have much family left, and fixing things. It keeps my hands busy. It helps me sleep. For a moment, the CEO didn't know what to say. Here he was, a man worth millions talking to a janitor who spoke with more peace than anyone he knew. Before leaving, Daniel added softly, when I lost my wife, I promised her I'd never stop doing good even if no one noticed. I guess I'm still trying. The CEO stood frozen, words caught in his throat. He wanted to say something, anything, but Daniel had already picked up his mop and continued his work. When Mr. Callahan returned to his office, he didn't turn on the cameras again. He just sat by the window, watching the lights below, listening to the faint echoes of a mop swishing against the marble floor. He thought of Daniel's words again and again. People deserve a clean start every morning. Those words felt heavier than any business deal he had ever signed. By the time the sun began to rise, Daniel had gone. The office was spotless, calm, and strangely alive. Mr. Callahan sat at his desk, still thinking about what he had learned that night. For the first time, he realized something simple yet powerful. While he managed the company by day, men like Daniel guarded its soul at night. And that realization, it wouldn't let him sleep again. Something was changing inside the CEO, He didn't understand it yet, but he was no longer just watching the janitor. He was beginning to see him. The morning sun spilled through the tall glass windows, painting gold lines across the CEO's desk. Mr. Callahan sat in his chair, but he wasn't thinking about profits or clients. His thoughts kept circling back to one man, the quiet janitor who worked like a shadow and spoke like a saint. He couldn't forget Daniel's words. People deserve a clean start every morning. It sounded simple, but something about it had sunk deep inside him. He wanted to know more. Who was Daniel before this? Why did a man with such calm strength end up cleaning floors at midnight? The CEO called HR later that morning. "Can you bring me the file for Daniel Williams?" he asked. The HR manager hesitated. Rarely did the CEO ask for a janitor's file, but obeyed. Within minutes, a thin folder lay on his desk. It looked smaller than a lunch menu. As Mr. Callahan opened it, his eyes paused on the first page. Former mechanical engineer, M-Tech Industrial Solutions. The CEO blinked in surprise. Engineer? He flipped through the rest. Daniel had once worked on high-level design projects, even received a patent for an energy-efficient system. But a few years later, the record showed a sudden drop. Employment terminated, personal reasons. After that, nothing. No new jobs. Then 3 years ago, he applied as a janitor at Callahan Industries. The CEO leaned back in his chair, silent. He couldn't understand how a man with such a past ended up pushing a mop. So during lunch, he decided to ask around quietly. A few older employees remembered Daniel. "He's always polite, sir," one woman said. "Never late, never complains. Doesn't talk much about himself." Another added softly, "I heard he lost his wife in a car crash. His daughter, too." After that, he just stopped everything. Mr. Callahan felt something heavy inside him. He looked out the window again, at the same streets below where people hurried, unaware of the lives hidden in their own building. That night, he stayed late again, but this time not just to watch. When Daniel arrived, Mr. Callahan stepped out of his office and walked down to the maintenance floor. He found Daniel sitting on an overturned bucket, repairing a broken vacuum cleaner with pieces of wire and tape. "Evening, sir," Daniel said, startled but polite. The CEO smiled gently. "You were an engineer once, weren't you?" Daniel froze, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. A long time ago. What happened?" Mr. Callahan asked, his voice calm, curious. Daniel sighed. "Life happened, sir. I built machines, big ones. I thought they would help people. But then one failed. My wife was there that day. The failure took her and my little girl. After that, I couldn't build anything again. I just wanted silence. Cleaning. It helps." The CEO said nothing. His throat tightened. He had heard hundreds of success stories in his life, but this quiet confession hit harder than any victory speech. Daniel smiled faintly, as if to end the conversation. "Besides," he said softly, "when you clean something dirty, you see it change right in front of your eyes. It's honest work. The world needs more of that." Mr. Callahan nodded slowly, unable to find words. He wanted to say "you deserve better," but he stopped himself. He realized Daniel didn't want pity. He wanted peace. After a long pause, the CEO asked, "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Daniel chuckled quietly. "Would it change anything, sir? Titles don't clean floors. Hands do." The CEO looked down at Daniel's rough hands, cracked, calloused, stained with years of hard work. He felt an unexpected respect growing, the kind that didn't come from power or money, but from character. That night, Mr. Callahan went home but couldn't sleep. He kept seeing Daniel's face, hearing his voice, remembering his quiet grace. The next morning, he told his secretary, "From today, every employee in this company deserves to be known by name, not by title." He started walking around the office more often, greeting people, listening to them. It confused everyone. The CEO, who once stayed locked in his office, now walked through the corridors where Daniel worked. Days passed, but his thoughts about Daniel deepened. He realized something profound. The company's walls stood not because of investors or strategies, but because of people like Daniel who carried silent pride in unseen work. And though Mr. Callahan didn't know it yet, fate was preparing a storm that would soon test everything both men stood for. One night, one terrifying night, would decide how their quiet bond would turn into something far greater than either of them expected. The sky was dark that night, the kind of darkness that warned something was coming. Clouds gathered over the city like a wall, and a low rumble of thunder rolled across the skyline. Inside Callahan Industries, the security lights flickered once, then twice. The storm was close. Daniel arrived, same as always, right on time, lunchbox in hand, mop and tools in his bag. The guards told him to go home early because the weather looked bad, but he just smiled and said, "Storms don't scare me. They clean the air." Then he walked in, humming softly as the wind howled outside. Up in his glass office, Mr. Callahan stood at the window, watching the rain begin to fall. He wasn't working tonight. He was waiting. Something about this man, this humble staffer, had stirred something inside him that no board meeting ever could. He didn't know why, but he needed to see him again. Lightning flashed. The first wave of thunder shook the windows. The CEO turned toward his computer screens. The security feed showed Daniel moving through the lower floors, cleaning the hallways as if nothing was wrong. But the power suddenly blinked out. The screens went black. Mr. Callahan frowned and stepped closer. "Not again," he muttered. Then one by one the emergency lights came on, dim and red. The elevators stopped. The servers in the basement powered down with a loud click. The CEO's heart sank. Those servers held everything: projects, client data, millions of dollars worth of work. If the backup generators failed, they would lose it all. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and ran for the stairs. The storm roared like a beast outside, water smashing against the building's glass walls. When he reached the first floor, he could already smell burning wires. Then he heard footsteps splashing in the dark. "Daniel," he shouted. A beam of light appeared, a small flashlight cutting through the shadows. Daniel turned, water dripping down his uniform. "Sir, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," the CEO said, out of breath. "It's dangerous down here." Daniel pointed to the basement door. "The servers are overheating. The drain system failed. If I don't fix it now, everything will flood." Before the CEO could answer, Daniel rushed down the stairs. The CEO followed, ignoring his own fear. The basement was half flooded, sparks flying from the electrical panels. Daniel waded into the water without hesitation, his shoes sinking into the rising pool. "Stop," the CEO shouted. "It's not safe." But Daniel kept going. He lifted a panel and used his bare hands to pull the emergency cables out, avoiding the live wires with the precision of an expert. The CEO realized in shock that this man remembered his old engineering instincts better than anyone could. "Hand me that wrench," Daniel called. The CEO grabbed it, his suit soaked, and passed it down. They worked together, two men from different worlds, one holding a flashlight, the other saving the company's lifeblood. At one point, a cable slipped, splashing water onto the circuits. Daniel reacted instantly, using his own jacket to shield it. A spark burned his sleeve, but he didn't stop. The CEO watched, heart pounding. "Why are you doing this?" he shouted over the storm. Daniel just smiled through the rain. "Because it needs to be done." Minutes felt like hours. Then finally, the lights flickered back to life. The hum of machines returned. The servers were safe. Daniel let out a breath of relief and leaned against the wall, exhausted. The CEO stood there, soaked to the bone, staring at him. This wasn't a janitor anymore. This was the man who had just saved his entire company, without orders, without credit, without fear. The rain slowed outside. The storm began to fade. Daniel picked up his tools, looked at the CEO, and said quietly, "I think it's fixed now, sir. You should get some rest." Mr. Callahan didn't move. He looked at Daniel for a long time, then said softly, "You could have died down here." Daniel shrugged. "So could a lot of people if we lost this building. I just did what anyone would do." But the CEO knew that wasn't true. No one else would have stayed. No one else would have risked their life for something that wasn't even theirs. As Daniel walked away, the CEO whispered under his breath, "No, Daniel. Not anyone would." When he finally went back upstairs, the building was calm again. But inside Mr. Callahan, a storm still raged, one of guilt, respect, and realization. He had seen real leadership tonight, not in a suit or behind a desk, but in a man standing waist-deep in dirty water, fixing what everyone else had given up on. That night, the CEO made a silent promise: Daniel's story would not stay hidden any longer. The world needed to know who this man really was. Morning came softly, but inside the CEO's mind, the storm had never stopped. He couldn't sleep the whole night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Daniel standing in that flooded basement, calm, brave, and selfless. It wasn't just an act of duty. It was something far deeper. He had seen true character, and it had shaken him to his core. By the time the sun rose, Mr. Callahan had already made a decision. He called his assistant and said quietly, "Ask Daniel to come to my office at 10. When Daniel arrived, he looked nervous. He stood just inside the door, still in his worn janitor uniform, holding his cap in both hands. "Did I do something wrong, sir?" he asked softly. His tone carried worry, the kind of worry that only comes from years of being blamed for things he didn't do. The CEO stood up from behind his desk and shook his head. "Sit down, Daniel, please." Daniel hesitated but obeyed. The CEO poured him a cup of coffee himself, something he had never done for anyone in years. Daniel looked down at the steaming mug like it was too expensive to touch. "I stayed late last night," the CEO began. "I saw what you did. You saved the entire company." Daniel smiled faintly, embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same, sir." Mr. Callahan leaned forward. "No, they wouldn't. Everyone else ran home when the storm hit. You stayed. You could have died down there." Daniel looked away. "I've already lost everything that mattered, sir. I don't really fear much anymore." The room fell silent. The CEO didn't know how to answer that. He saw the quiet pain in Daniel's eyes, the kind that never truly leaves. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't understand you, Daniel. You do more for this place than people who earn 10 times your pay. Why?" Daniel took a slow sip of the coffee. "Because I remember what it feels like to build something with your own hands," he said. "And I remember what it feels like to lose it. Maybe this building isn't mine, but if I can keep it standing, maybe I can still make peace with myself." The CEO felt something inside him crack. He had built his empire chasing power and numbers. But this man, this quiet janitor, was teaching him what true strength looked like. He stood up suddenly and said, "Come with me." They walked through the building together. People stared as the CEO and the janitor passed side by side. No one had ever seen that before. When they reached the lobby, the CEO stopped. He looked at Daniel and said, "You see this place? The people here work because of men like you. They just don't know it yet." Daniel smiled humbly. "Thank you, sir, but please, I'm fine where I am." The CEO shook his head. "No, you're not. You deserve more." But Daniel gently put his cap back on and replied, "Sometimes, sir, being useful is worth more than being important." Then he walked away, leaving the CEO speechless for hours. Mr. Callahan sat alone in his office thinking about those words. Being useful is worth more than being important. He had spent his whole life chasing the wrong thing. That evening, as Daniel prepared to leave, the CEO appeared again, standing near the exit. "Daniel," he said quietly, "you taught me something last night." Daniel turned. "What's that, sir?" The CEO took a deep breath. "That real leadership isn't about being seen. It's about doing what's right even when no one's watching." Daniel smiled a tired, kind smile. "Then I guess you were watching at the right time, sir." They both laughed softly. But behind those smiles was something deep, a connection built from respect, not rank. As Daniel left the building, the CEO looked down from his glass window again. But this time he wasn't just watching, he was learning. He knew that the next chapter of this company, and of his own life, had to change. He picked up the phone and called the HR director. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I want every department head in the meeting room. We're going to talk about the people who keep this company alive when no one's looking." That night, the CEO didn't feel powerful or rich. He just felt human. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass towers of Callahan Industries, touching every floor, every desk, every chair that Daniel had quietly cared for over the years. But something was different. The air buzzed with whispers. People were talking, curious, uncertain. Word had spread overnight that the CEO had called an emergency company-wide meeting, and no one knew why. Daniel didn't think it concerned him. He walked in like always, wearing his faded uniform and holding his old lunchbox. He smiled politely at the security guards, nodded to the receptionist, and went straight to the supply closet. He had floors to mop, windows to polish. He had no idea that today, the entire company was about to hear his name. Upstairs in the top-floor conference room, executives gathered nervously. Laptops were open, pens clicked, whispers filled the air. Then the door opened and Mr. Callahan walked in. The room went silent. He didn't carry his usual stack of papers. Instead, he carried something small, A photo frame, cracked glass taped neatly together. He set it down on the table. "This," he said quietly, "was fixed by a man none of you have ever thanked." No one moved. The CEO took a deep breath. "Last night during the storm, our servers nearly flooded. If not for one man, one janitor, we would have lost everything." Gasps filled the room. He risked his life for this company, and not because it was his job, but because he cared. Someone in the back asked, "Who was it, sir?" Mr. Callahan looked up. "Daniel Williams." The name meant nothing to most of them. A few glanced at each other, confused. "The janitor?" someone whispered. The CEO nodded. "Yes, the man you pass every day without seeing." He paused and looked around the room. "I watched him for weeks. He fixes what others break, replaces things from his own pocket, leaves kind notes on your desks. He doesn't do it for attention. He does it because it's right." The room was silent. For the first time, the people who ran the company realized how blind they had been. Then Mr. Callahan smiled slightly. "He once told me something I'll never forget. That being useful is worth more than being important. From today, I want everyone in this company to remember those words. So we're creating a new position, Chief Maintenance and Facilities Engineer, and I want Daniel to be the first to hold it." Applause filled the room, not polite applause, real, honest, emotional clapping that came from respect. Downstairs, Daniel was polishing the lobby floor when the elevator doors opened. The HR manager stepped out, smiling nervously. "Daniel," she said, "the CEO wants you upstairs." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Now, did something break?" "Just come," she said softly. He followed her up, unsure what to expect. When he stepped into the conference room, everyone stood. Executives, managers, even the CEO himself. For a moment, Daniel thought he'd walked into the wrong place. "Mr. Williams," the CEO said, walking toward him, "this company stands today because of you. You've shown us what real dedication looks like. It's time the world sees it too." He handed Daniel a new ID badge, one that didn't say janitor. It said Chief Facilities Engineer. Daniel stared at it, speechless. "Sir, I don't deserve this." Mr. Callahan smiled gently. "You earned it a long time ago. We were just too blind to notice." The room erupted again in applause. Some employees even wiped away tears. Daniel, humbled and overwhelmed, could barely speak. "I was just doing my job," he whispered. The CEO shook his head. "No, Daniel. You were doing what's right. There's a difference." That moment changed the entire company's heart. For the first time, people saw that real greatness doesn't wear suits or titles. It wears tired hands, quiet hearts, and honest work. Later that day, as Daniel walked through the building with his new badge, people smiled and greeted him by name. He wasn't invisible anymore. The man who once worked in silence had finally been heard, and in the CEO's office, the old cracked photo frame still sat on the desk, not as a decoration, but as a reminder of the man who fixed more than glass. He had fixed the soul of the company. Months passed, and Callahan Industries didn't feel like the same place anymore. The mood had changed. People stayed a little later, smiled a little more, and treated each other with a new kind of respect. It wasn't the CEO's speeches or new policies that caused it. It was one quiet man who had unknowingly started a revolution simply by doing his job with love. Daniel still wore his old uniform, though now everyone insisted he didn't have to. "This feels more honest," he'd say with a small grin. He didn't want a fancy office or a new title on the door. He still walked the same halls at night, mop in hand, flashlight in his pocket, humming softly as the world slept. But now, when people saw him, they didn't look away. They smiled, they greeted him, they thanked him. Mr. Callahan often joined him after hours. He didn't announce it. He would just quietly show up with 2 cups of coffee. The first time it happened, Daniel laughed. "You shouldn't be here, sir. You're the boss." The CEO smiled. "And you're the reason I'm a better one." Together, they would walk the building, talking about life more than business. Daniel told him about his late wife, about how she used to say that every floor you clean reflects your heart. The CEO listened closely, sometimes even taking notes. For him, Daniel had become more than an employee. He was a teacher who never meant to teach. One evening, a new intern named Lily stayed late, trying to fix a jammed printer. Daniel stopped by and helped her with a gentle smile. The next morning, she told the whole office how Mr. Williams had stayed with her until midnight, teaching her how to fix it herself. That story spread fast. Soon people began leaving handwritten notes on Daniel's cart. "Thank you for making this place shine. You inspire us. Your kindness matters." The CEO noticed the difference too. The company's atmosphere, once cold and mechanical, had turned warm and human. Employees worked harder, not because of deadlines, but because they wanted to make Daniel proud. One Friday afternoon, the CEO called everyone to the lobby. "There's someone I want you all to meet," he said, though everyone already knew. Daniel stood at the front, nervous as ever. "This man reminded us," the CEO said, "that success isn't measured by profit, but by purpose. He showed us that even when no one's watching, doing what's right changes everything, and he did it without asking for a thing in return." The entire company applauded. Some people cheered, others clapped through tears. Daniel bowed his head, too humble to speak. When the noise faded, he said softly, "I just wanted to make this place feel like home." And it did. That night, when everyone had gone home, Daniel stood in the same empty office where it all began. The lights hummed, the floor gleamed, and outside the city sparkled like a sea of stars. He looked at his reflection in the glass. Older now, but at peace. Upstairs, the CEO watched quietly, just as he had that first night. But this time he didn't see a janitor. He saw a man who had rebuilt the heart of his company, piece by piece with his own hands. Daniel turned off the lights, just as he always did, and whispered to himself, "Another clean start for tomorrow." As the door closed behind him, the CEO smiled and whispered back, "Because of you, Daniel." It always will be. And in that moment, both men understood greatness isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks softly in the dark, leaving light behind for everyone else to follow. A year later, the story of Daniel Williams had spread far beyond the walls of Callahan Industries. What started as a quiet act of kindness had become something much bigger, something alive. News outlets called it the man who fixed more than floors. People wrote about him online, sharing how one janitor's heart had changed an entire company's soul. But Daniel never chased the attention. He still came to work early, cleaned the same halls, and treated everyone from interns to executives with the same gentle smile. One cold winter evening, Mr. Callahan stood at his office window again, just like that first night when he'd accidentally watched Daniel through the cameras. But now the view below looked different. Employees stayed after hours helping each other. A young intern brought hot chocolate for the night guard. The maintenance crew laughed with engineers. It was a family now, a place alive with humanity, and at the center of it all was Daniel. That night, the CEO walked down to the lobby. He found Daniel mopping near the main entrance, as always. "Still working this late?" Callahan said with a smile. Daniel looked up and chuckled softly. "Old habits, sir. The floors sleep better when they're clean." The CEO laughed. "You've changed this place, Daniel. I thought I built a company, but you built a home." Daniel looked thoughtful for a moment. "No, sir. You built the walls. I just made sure people could walk inside them without slipping." Callahan smiled at that. One of those rare, honest smiles that come from gratitude, not power. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Then maybe it's time I return the favor." Daniel frowned. "What's this?" "Open it," Callahan said. Inside was a key card and a folded letter. Daniel unfolded it slowly. The letter read, "Effective immediately, you are being promoted to Director of Employee Well-Being and Workplace Harmony. You've already been doing the job for years. It's time your title matched your heart." Daniel stared at it for a long moment, speechless. "Sir, I'm just a man who cleans." The CEO shook his head. "You're the man who taught me how to see." For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the city outside filled the silence. Then Daniel said quietly, "If I accept, I don't want an office. I want to stay here with them. I want to keep walking the floors." The CEO nodded. "Then keep walking them, Daniel. Lead the way." Months passed and the company only grew stronger. Productivity rose, turnover fell, and employee happiness reached numbers no consultant had ever achieved. But the secret wasn't in new software or fancy strategies. It was in one man's belief that small acts of care could move mountains. One evening, Daniel sat alone in the break room, looking at an old photo of his late wife. "You were right," he whispered softly. "The world does change when you clean it with love." He didn't notice Mr. Callahan standing at the doorway. watching quietly, just like he used to. The CEO turned off the hallway lights, leaving only the glow from the vending machine. "Good night, Daniel," he said gently. "Good night, sir," Daniel replied, smiling faintly. When he left the building, the city lights reflected on the wet pavement, shining like tiny stars at his feet. He paused, took a deep breath, and whispered the same words that had carried him through every storm. "Every night, every unseen hour, tomorrow, I'll make it shine again." And somewhere high above, in a glass office filled with light, the CEO whispered the same promise back, because men like Daniel didn't just keep the floors clean, they kept hope alive. And long after the world forgot his name, the shine he left behind would never fade. Winter melted into spring, and with it came a quiet peace across Callahan Industries. Flowers bloomed along the courtyard paths that Daniel himself had helped plant, their colors glowing against the gray concrete. A full year had passed since that storm, the night that changed everything. Yet Daniel still treated each shift as if it were his first day on the job. No matter his title, he still carried his mop, still greeted the guards by name, still smiled at everyone who passed. But this time, people noticed. People felt it. The company now had a new culture, one built not from profit charts or business plans, but from something far stronger: respect. When new hires joined, their orientation always included one line from the CEO himself. "If you want to learn leadership, follow Daniel for a day." And they did. Daniel became a quiet legend inside the building. He never gave long speeches, but everyone listened when he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and full of simple truth. "Don't clean for others," he once told the interns. "Clean for yourself. Because when you make things better, you become better too." That single line ended up printed on posters in every hallway. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived for Mr. Callahan. It was from a national business magazine, informing him that his company had been nominated for Best Workplace Environment of the Year. He smiled, but he knew exactly why. The judges saw rising profits and efficiency, but he saw Daniel's shadow in every success. At the award ceremony weeks later, the host called Mr. Callahan to the stage. Cameras flashed, applause echoed. But instead of taking credit, he looked into the crowd and said, "The real award belongs to someone who works when no one's watching." He motioned toward the audience, where Daniel sat uncomfortably in his neatly pressed uniform. People turned, clapping louder, and Daniel's face flushed red. The spotlight hit him for the first time. Mr. Callahan continued, "He taught me that greatness doesn't wear suits, it wears humility. It walks quietly, fixes what's broken, and never asks for praise. Tonight we honor the man who reminded us what humanity looks like." Everyone stood. The room filled with cheers as Daniel slowly walked to the stage. He looked completely overwhelmed, his eyes glassy with disbelief. The CEO handed him the trophy, but Daniel pushed it back gently. "Sir, this belongs to everyone here," he said softly. "You gave me a job when I had nothing. I just did what I was meant to do." The CEO smiled. "And that's exactly why you deserve it." The applause grew even louder. Some executives even cried. After the ceremony, reporters tried to interview Daniel, but he quietly slipped away, escaping into the cool night air. He stood outside the grand building, holding the small golden plaque in his hands, staring at it under the streetlight. The city shimmered beyond him. He whispered, "I never wanted to be seen. I just wanted to make things right." Behind him, the CEO appeared, hands in his pockets. "You did, Daniel. You made all of it right." Daniel smiled, that same humble smile he had worn since the very beginning. "No, sir," he said quietly. "We did it together." They stood there for a long time, two men from opposite worlds, one who built towers, the other who made them stand tall. Later that night, Daniel returned home to his small apartment. He placed the award not on a shelf, but beside a photo of his late wife and daughter. "You see, love," he whispered softly, "I kept my promise. I made something clean again." He looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars, and smiled. Somewhere inside him, he knew this wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone who ever worked hard without being noticed. Everyone who gave their best when no one said thank you. And long after Daniel turned off the light and went to sleep, the world outside kept shining, reflecting the quiet brilliance of a man who never needed to be famous to make history.